Christianity is a religion that sprung up nearly 2,000 years ago, completely changing the landscape of the Middle East and the Western Hemisphere as it would later be settled. This all happened following the life of Christ, with no part of his life being more important than his death and resurrection. In the face of criticisms of Christianity, it is absolutely imperative that Christians be entirely persuaded that Jesus did in fact die and was resurrected, and be able to give proofs to those that would criticize this. I've recently read several articles and books written by leading researchers in this field, and would like to share a few proofs with you this evening about why it is not only reasonable but rational to believe that Jesus did in fact die and was resurrected. I would like to share evidence with you of psychological nature, evidence that the gospel accounts are trustworthy, and also physical evidence. First, for the psychological evidence. For those that say that the disciples merely came up with this story on their own, they misunderstand the culture and religious setting in which they lived, where the idea of a single person being resurrected was completely foreign to them. Thus, it would have been unimaginable and something that they could not have come up with on their own. Second, it is unlikely that if this had been a hoax, that the secret would have never come out, especially considering the hardships that were endured by Jesus' followers through their lives because of this belief, many of them dying martyrs' deaths. And finally, to those who try and explain away the witnesses of Jesus after his resurrection due to hallucination, they misunderstand hallucinations, as hallucinations generally come to people in a set emotional state as well as a set outer environment. However, the witnesses of Jesus were in varying emotional states, in various relationships to Jesus, as well as in different environments. Some saw him along with a large group, others saw him in one-on-one individual experiences. Thus, it is unlikely that all of them had the same hallucination. Second, to give trustworthiness to the gospel accounts, one can look at the fact that the gospels were written shortly after the life of Christ. Thus, those who had been alive at the time of the events of Jesus' life could have easily disproven the gospel accounts when they were written. Also, historians agree that it takes several hundred years for legend to develop. This was far more time than was present between the events of Jesus' life and when they were recorded. Second, it is unlikely that if there had been fabrication, that there would have been specific mention of Joseph of Arimathea, who was widely known as a religious leader in the place of his tomb in whom Jesus was buried, was publicly known. And finally, the two women who discovered Jesus' tomb to be empty would also have been an unlikely fabrication, as women's status was poor at this time, and this would have been a disgrace to early Christianity, as well as women's testimonies were not valid in a court of law. So this would have been an unlikely fabrication. And finally, for physical evidence, as I pointed out earlier, there were over 500 witnesses over a course of 40 days, those who had known Jesus before and those who didn't know him, all in various settings. For assurance that Jesus did in fact die and did not merely swoon and then recover in the tomb, we can look at the fact that Jesus died at the hands of the Romans in a crucifixion, a type of death that they took pride in and had perfected it to an art form. They also had several checks to assure that someone had in fact died. One can see two of these in the Bible, with the breaking of the criminal's legs on either side and also the piercing of the heart with a spear. And finally, there's physical evidence that Jesus' body did not remain in the tomb through the fact that there was no veneration on his tomb. Despite the fact that the location of the tomb was publicly known, there was no veneration, which was a popular custom at that time following the death of popular leaders and messianic figures, where followers would come and worship and leave gifts at their tomb. And yet there is no evidence of this occurring in Jesus' tomb. All of these combined together serve to show that Jesus did in fact die and was resurrected, and these form a powerful argument to that. I've also pointed out several arguments against this, which are commonly used, and show that those are unfounded. This should serve to persuade a Christian and also give them the ability to persuade others. The life of Jesus is the central part of the Christian religion, and there's no part more important than the resurrection. Without this, Christianity as a religion fades.